Do you not?
Oh, it's in our life just waiting to talk about sports. It's actually true.
You'll see the truth.
You'll see.
Everybody ready? Go. Plan the United States Supreme Court should grant certiorari to the case of Agnew versus National Collegiate Athletic Association and rule that the NCAA scholarship practices are a price-fixing agreement and a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Again, the SCOTUS should grant certiorari to the case of Agnew versus NCAA and rule that the NCAA scholarship practices are a price-fixing agreement and a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Dr. Coffey, do you have any questions?
How does this break up the NCAA?
It is in violation of an antitrust act.
Right, but how does that break up?
It doesn't break it up, it just means they can't mess with their scholarships, right?
No, it actually will break up the NCAA by calling it a monopoly and by telling it that it can't be.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Advantage 1 harms. First argument is that the collegiate sports are based on exploitation of labor of young students who might not otherwise be able to afford to attend college because of restrictions on how long they have their scholarships for. They can't sell their labor in their prime time, which means they're not allowed to do things like enter into professional sports for a certain period of time. For instance, 1 year after high school for basketball players and 2 years after high school for football players, people can't enter into markets or internationally or into club leagues while they're forced into just to compete for the university. Second is the collegiate sports feed into a banking model of education because they turn students literally into commodities that are used by the university in order to gain more money by showing them on TV and getting TV rights. The third argument is that the NCAA literally says who people can talk to. People can only which means that you only are capable of talking to people who have an incentive to keep you in the cartel. This shows no sign of change. Just passed a proposition just passed today that would allow collegiate coaches and recruiters to have unlimited text and unlimited calls to high school juniors, literally the only people who you're capable of having any contact with as a prospective student that is going to be recruited into a university system to play a sport for them are the people who want to keep you in the game, which means that you are not capable of getting outside advice, not only from other schools, but you're incapable of getting outside advice from people who would have your best interests at heart. You can't sell anything like your time, your autograph, your jersey. You can't sell anything that you own or create while you're in the university system or while you're in the process of recruitment into the university, and we think that this is problematic. Your question?
Yeah. How is this in the Supreme Court when it's only in the district court now and hasn't been ruled on?
In Indiana, it's not even applied for cert.
I do not think that is a statement of fact, but also I think that you're wrong about that.
Okay.
But also, they would bring it up to the Supreme Court. I consulted Will, and he's in law school, and he said that it was okay. Will Chamberlain said that it was legit. So.
Yeah, no.
Solvency. First argument is that if we have multiple if we have multiple places where students are recruited into that don't have uniform rules, then it creates competition between markets, which means that students can pick the best market to sell their labor to. This is not only better for individuals, but it's also better for them to be able to look at what can affect their family holistically, not only just for their future, but also for the future of the individuals that they're capable of supporting and the individuals that are affected by their life decisions. For instance, an individual may be recruited to a school that is far away from their family because that school is going to offer them more money, and because they're incapable of talking to recruiters from other schools, and those are the decisions. That's the decision they're thus forced into. Also, or half breaks down the cartel by creating private markets within schools that gives schools the incentive to compete with other schools in order to be able to access the best players instead of just blind them with the recruitment process that currently exists. This allows us to create an enormous amount of different, this allows us to create variation in different educational models. Things like tutoring students, which happens in European soccer clubs now, where individuals are tutored instead of just being left to the non-demanding educational curriculum that a lot of students revert to in a world where they aren't pushed. I've already taken 2 questions. I'm sorry. Impacts. First is labor exploitation. We think that we need to understand how this is necessary to understand how we approach violence in our society. The notion that one individual can limit and control your label by selling you as a commodity is the core of coercion. The student athletes are literally just a standing reserve that can accrue an infinite amount of brain injury and wreck their body for years while they are just used as the university as someone that can make money for them. We think that this is a problematic mentality that we have, with the way that we treat, with the way that we treat individuals that we have in our education system. Also, our app offers a change towards the systemic problem within higher education. In this regard, we say that it creates innovation within a class of students that the market literally wants to support. That the market will always be there for the market will be there and has an incentive to be there for students. We think that this will mean that there will always be a demand for individuals to watch sports. People like watching Oregon football, which is why this market exists. Third is that there's a racial disparity between the white and black players. How white and black players are treated. The Black Coaches Association published a study in 2009 that said that there was a 20% difference in graduation success rates between black and white Division I athletes, but this was up to 70%, despite up to 70% of money spent to recruit black players. The African American disproportionate representation means that the individuals are incapable of. It means that a lot of times students are unable to advocate for their own rights or benefits or towards their education because the recruitment practices currently do not allow them to have the same sort of economic preparation in a world where they're just told that if you where students are young students are told that if you do not spend time practicing, you will not be recruited, which means that this directly trades off with their education. This creates a forced labor market where individuals are led to believe that the time spent solely on education trades off entirely with their athletic ability, which means that they're incapable of escaping from a cycle of poverty through means like education. We think that this results in perpetual poverty, and that this is a dehumanizing impact where individuals are incapable of escaping their socioeconomic status. Impact calculus. First of all, evaluate systemic impacts over terminal claims that are black swans, which means that there are high magnitude impacts are impossible to predict because, like the Arab Spring began with a man lighting himself on fire, we need to be sure that we should reject ideas that debate can accurately forecast large-scale political or social shifts that deal with complex systems that will have complex and unique social actors. Also, intervening actors prevent any sort of escalation because the long time frame exponentially increase the probability of inaccuracy because unknown externalities mitigate the impacts, and also other actors will be capable of stepping in to stop terminal impacts. Also, the multiplier effect, which stacks links, which means that stacking links multiplies the inaccuracies to produce conclusions that are not actually reasonable or realistic. This bias is worse in a competitive activity where it's exaggerated in order to win a battle. Also, existential risk is bad because doomsday claims take advantage of cognitive bias to produce a bad policy, which just by a knee-jerk response to an implausible scenario.
What? Us?
Or
Is that what they're
like,
reading?
apparently people are circulating similar arguments.
Oh,
They took them from us.
but it's okay.
They can have them.
I like
We definitely read them first.
Alright, I'm gonna do
Tom read that once ago.
I'm gonna do three off and then case number.
You're not ready to describe it? Okay.
Yeah, no.
That's 4.
I'm just gonna do
Okay.
Ready? Quick question. No more NCAA whatsoever as soon as your plan passes, correct? Katie, no more NCAA, right?
That is not what our affirmative says.
Okay, go on.
Okay, cool. The first one is plan violates the points interpretation. The plan must be out that the Indiana District Court rules against the NCAA and the court case, which is what's
Agnew
versus NCAA decent violation. They grant church story to the Supreme Court ruling. See supports the standards. The first one is not Will Chamberlain because predictability in the case of the district court is in the district courts level right now in Indiana, which means there's no way to predict that they're going to go to SCOTUS over the top of them and just like take the case without Indiana even ruling on it. It's not even been ruled on Indiana. The next part is that we have zero ability to prepare for this as the Supreme Court due to the fact that it's not even there. It's not predictable whatsoever. There's no reason why we think something that's in district court will all of a sudden be tried in Supreme Court just for fun or because Will Chamberlain says so. Next, standards education, the fact that FIA should follow real world. That the SCOTUS can't just grant tertiary to the case that wasn't entrapped
That didn't even apply.
that didn't even apply for certification. The DSAT plan is
Also, this means that 100% solvency.
it's also 100% solvency deficit because it's just not real world. There's no way this can happen. There's no way this can go down. There's no way for fiat. There's no means through fiat that you just like take the case away before it's even ruled out. So this comes off before the first thing you're voting is that it says fairness without predictability or education. You're actually saying it's top stake education. If we can't look at how this actually happened in the real world, this hurts our education. Next one's topicality and interpretation is that you must break up the actual NCAA, the whole control of NCAA and their control over college sports. The violation.
Monopoly.
Yeah. You must break up NCAA's control of college sports and this monopoly. Violation. They don't actually break it up. They only have a $67 billion ruling. 67 billion, right? Yeah. They only have a $67 billion ruling or something of that nature, which doesn't matter due to the fact that this one actually breaks them up, especially when they did sign a $1.7 billion television contract. Is it 67 billion or million? It's million, right?
I think it's million.
It's 67 million. They just signed a $1.7 billion television contract for basketball. It's a pin in the bucket. They just pay for it and they just like walk around it. This doesn't break it up. Same for predictability. They actually have to break up NCAA, not just pay a fine. This is bad for a couple reasons. Due to the fact that we need links to dispatch for actually breaking up the NCAA, which you don't get. And even when that's a point of information, they don't even say it works that way. I like literally just ask them if they break up the NCAA, and they will not even say yes or no, which means that they're like they're hiding and becoming a moving target when they won't even say if they're breaking it up or not. The next one is going to be the next one is going to be limits. They completely unlimit the resolution, so they can just like get a fine and try to go for all these critical impacts. It'll never happen because they don't actually break up NCAA. It's also 100% solely take out voters for speaking out of fairness to the fact that there's no fairness in the round when they're being a moving target. They won't actually tell us if they're breaking up the NCAA or not to have links to our diss ads, and also topics of education because we don't even know what it does or how they even get to their impacts. We don't even know if the NCAA goes away with its rules or laws. Next, diss ad. Hurting college students, 8 points uniqueness. Currently right now there's a couple things why the NCAA is good, which they don't bring up. The first one is that we have things like Title IX restrictions that are enforced through the NCAA. Without the NCAA, there's no way to enforce Title IX ones because individual colleges are actually trying to go against Title IX to do this less, and there's no one to find violations. The second one is that currently there's no pay for play. They think pay for play is awesome. I'm going to give you a bunch of reasons why it's horrible. The third answer is that there's revenue sharing. Currently, the top 40 schools make all of the revenue for college basketball and college football. Well, if they do that individually, that means that any school besides those top 40, they're at Oregon, so it's going to be awesome. They're going to have a shit ton of money, but unfortunately for the rest of us, we're not going to have it, which means that this is going to decrease the amount of money. This revenue does a couple things. First thing is going to be R&D in schools, like going into computer labs. The second one is going to be classrooms. They get to build new buildings and new classrooms through this type of money. The third one is rehab centers for sports. They know that Oregon is one of the best rehab centers in the world because they're at the top of the food chain. Number 4 is academic standards. Currently, there are vigorous academic standards. They talk about this completely turns their case because they say African American students don't graduate as much. But guess what? If there's no minimum academic standard, why would coaches teach you to give you tutors or make you go to class when you don't have to anymore? Because there's no reason to get a minimum GPA. This turns case. Number five is this. It protects you from agents. Agents are basically thefts. They're the ones that take young athletes and try to take their money, try to make them sign contracts they're not supposed to, take all of their cash, and don't worry if they get hurt. I.e. Reggie Bush. The next answer, or Terrell Pryor. The next answer is that the number 6 on uniqueness is that schools currently on the brink of financing, especially state schools like California state schools or Utah state schools or most Southwest East state schools because they don't have federal funding, so they don't get as much federal funding. So they've been supplementing this with TV deals and also through revenue sharing, which only happens through the NCAA because there's no other contracts. And like they said on case, this revenue sharing is going to go from a school-to-school basis. So if you're not in the top 40, you're not getting that cash anymore, which means that your school does not get funding anymore. So the links. The first link. The link is you destroy the NCAA, which means that there is no more Title IX becomes an interpretation between every single college across the United States, which means that this will literally be flooded with lawsuits. Title IX is extremely important. It's important because this is one of the biggest ways to shatter the pink ceiling due to the fact that we're going to have more women in colleges since Title IX came in. It's almost increased over 200% since the original passing of Title IX. The next internal link is that you increase pay for play, which means that you're the one that actually commodifies students. Instead of trying to pay them fair wage, you treat them like superstars, give them a bunch of money, and then they flame out because they don't make it in the pros, which means that you just allow for also other endorsement deals, which are also predatory through agents, which means that they just steal the money from them anyways because you need the education to get the back end. The third interlink is that you take away all academic standards to the fact that without the NCAA, there's no reason we have to have good grades anymore because they're the one that's enforced the standards, which means that there's no nuance to be on a school-by-school basis, like they said. And who's going to get the best students, the players? The ones that don't want to go to school and just want to play football or basketball. And so what are the selling points? The next, so the impacts, the first. Oh, also the next internal link is that small schools besides the top 40 don't get funding anymore, which collapses all of their ability to have academic scholarships, research and development, also more classrooms, and be able to keep tuition low. This does a couple of things. The first impact is that you make college education the super elite, which does a couple of things. The first thing is that you make it so when people of extreme privilege can go to college, which means that this takes away the ability to have grants and also scholarships to other people on academic or science-based needs. The next answer is that you destroy gender equality due to the fact that you classify pink ceiling because so many schools be tired of litigation, just trying to get more students in, and they need to get the best players and the best sports to make the most money because they get individual TV contracts now and individual endorsement deals that they just need what's best for television, which means they're going to keep Title IX to get rid of Title IX or to get around Title IX. The next answer is you just increase the ability for more. They talk about structural violence. You increase structural violence because you allow for the commodification of people. Instead of saying, look, we can give you a great academic opportunity if you come to our college. Now we're going to give you a shit ton of money and you can just play until you leave and you have no backup plan. Guess what? The average career for an NFL player is 3 years. The average salary is only $200,000, which you can burn right away, which means that they would literally be broke, injured, and have no educational backing, which means that you go broke. Currently in the NFL, over 67% of players file for bankruptcy within 10 years of playing the game because they don't finish college. If there's no incentive to finish college except for making money, you don't have to go to classes, means you just increase bankruptcy, which probably only increases. This also increases the amount of discrepancy between African Americans and white people, and also athletes as a whole, because they don't get to finish college, which means this only makes you a pawn to people taking your money on the case. Look, we've already given you like 6 individual turns they cannot solve because the fact that TV rights are just going to turn to go from the NCAA to individual schools, which only lead to a patriarchal society where only the top hierarchy of colleges actually make money, which destroys the ability to do this next on solvency. They can't solve because not multiple school markets. You actually divide it. Like the SEC and the Pac-12 will be the only schools that will be able to flourish because they make the most money. Everything else loses money. You collapse the college system. You collapse Cal State schools, which is the biggest feeder of people getting money. You don't get your impacts.
The order is, I'm just checking, that was just at the bottom of the diss, the last argument you made?
It was on case.
The order is going to be first the topicality breakup monopoly argument. Then it's going to be the plan flaw argument.
The what?
The plan flaw, their first theory violation. Then it's going to be the affirmative, advantage 1, advantage 2. It's going to be the affirmative, advantage 1.
I was tripping. I was like, man, I'm about to be yelling at the end of
Sorry,
the
I floated on 2 pieces of paper because it was long, so I just thought
What?
And then it's going to be the disadvantage. Is everyone ready? I started. Okay, first on topicality. First on topicality is immediate interpretation. Breaking up the monopoly that currently exists within the NCAA means that the NCAA no longer has a stranglehold on the market. This is true of the antitrust laws to attorneys back with oil companies. It's not necessarily saying that the oil companies themselves have to go away, but saying that they have to, but saying that the monopoly that they've created within the market is fundamentally wrong. Next is the counter-interpretation. We simply think that breakup means make smaller, which means that any action that makes the NCAA smaller or less influential within the world called athletics. This falls under the resolution. This is always going to be best for 2 reasons. The first is predictability. The first is predictability. The resolution isn't clear on whether or not breakup means to eliminate. If it would have said that, it would have said eliminate, which means that we're based on the resolution. This is key to affirmative predictability. Affirmative predictability, which always valued over negative predictability because it means that because it's used in the entirety of the 7 minutes of the PMC. The next argument is grounded. The next argument is ground. We only have one plan option in the world where we have to eliminate the NCAA. Being able to break up the ground means that we have multiple plan options. This is key to encourage different types of in-depth education and research within the literature page, which is the internally to real education. You say that this is a $6 billion rule, and they're simply going to be able to pay the fines. We articulate through our solvency that they're going to be able to make it smaller. We expect them to make it smaller. Don't vote on potential abuse. You don't do anything around. Furthermore, you say that we're under the resolution classified above. That over limiting the affirmative team is always going to be worse. And you say fairness, and you say that it's not fair. You don't evaluate fair education. Evaluate within the paradigm of reasonability, as long as they're reasonably topical, as long as we from the resolution and allow them links to their arguments. This means that you should avoid parliamentary topicality. This is simply an attempt to avoid talking about the issue that exists in the debate round. This is first of all, and this instance of masking, we don't talk about issues of structural violence because we simply refer to written on cheap shot topicality violations. In addition, we think that topicality is always going to have a negative bias because they get a negative bias because they get more time to find definitions in the prep time and get specific shells. This means always are affirmative. Next one, plan flaw.
Question?
Yes.
You say something about make smaller in response to the $67 million. What is that argument that like?
We're saying that the $67 billion ruling is making the NCAA smaller. It is diminishing their effect.
Right, but making smaller does what to break up the monopoly? Like how? Like in what way does that break up the monopoly?
It allows room within the market for other things to emerge.
How? Like,
Right, like what else?
the NCAA has a stranglehold on all the colleges. They pay the fine.
Right,
How
there's
do they
nothing
give
else.
up how do they license that out? Like if they're still
The
there?
antitrust law, the empirical evidence, this is what the precedent that we're ruling on, this is what it does. I'm not sure how else to explain it. Next one is the clinical argument. First argument was in the interpretation. The currently the British Victoria has been granted. He has cases with contact from the Supreme Court. This is literally an issue that can't be decided within this debate round because it's simply one side saying one thing and the other saying the other thing. The next argument I'm going to make is that you should prefer and you should vote on this argument you should vote on this argument because and you should vote on this argument. The first reason is resolution flaw. You shouldn't vote against us or a flaw within the resolution that we have no control over. In terms of that topic area, 20 minutes isn't enough time for us to be able to understand every court case that exists, every court case that had that has existed. In addition, we articulate the impact and the methodological framing of the case is more important than different types of planful arguments, and that we should view this debate round as a space with an order to develop methodology, and that should be the role of the developers. And after just go on to their standards, they say there's no predictability because it's not within the district courts. You obviously are capable of finding the court, and as long as it's a prominent case, there is a reasonable assumption that it will go into writ of certiorari. This means that sorry, I want another counter interpretation that normal means that if the currently isn't of the Supreme Court, that it will go there. We're not going to try to spike out of anything. These are still ground laws for you. You say predicted in the district court, even if that's true, still doesn't mean a huge amount of ground laws. You still have the ability to argue against it. You say that there's no ability to do this. Furthermore, you still have different types of generic links. Any critique would link to this. Would link to this argument as well as multiple types of disadvantages or arguments about the substance of the debate. You simply don't have the position to read your different types of politics disadvantages. Decrease education because they decrease the topic specific education. Next, you say for more, we say that the courts aren't debated enough with the debate rounds, which means that in order to understand the way the political system functions, we should be able to debate around debate on courts, cross-applied reasonability arguments. We're going to go on to the first one, please.
We also address the topic-specific education.
What do they say about that?
Like, sorry.
What is that? Okay. Back and flip-flop. They say topic-specific education. Look, in this instance, topic-specific education is about what happens to athletes within the system of the NCAA. As long as we are addressing that issue, I think that we are addressing the heart of the topic. Go on to be affirmative. First argument is the role of the ballot. The judge should evaluate the methodology of each course. This is always beneficial for two reasons. The first argument is that method underpins and informs practice. We have to have a methodology of how we understand the world, how we understand different types of social structures before we can ever make any actions upon that. Changing fundamental methodologies leads to a change in policies. We had to have a different understanding. We have to have that understanding, that a fundamental shift in our mindset to think that women were rational agents before we gave them the right to vote. This is going to be net beneficial and the prerequisite to all your types of education, because without this type of critical inquiry, we simply live in a world of totalitarian government, which means we don't have the ability to act within the political system. Our affirmative embraces Katie's ability to make change through the speech act that we embrace within the 1AC cross-apply, the cross-apply and drop down to their case arguments.
Question?
Yes?
Like, what is it?
Already answered so many
Answered a lot of questions.
Can Megan please give her speech?
What does it say? Rights going to individual schools provided
TV
greater
rights.
TV.
Yeah, they're TV rights.
TV rights going to individual schools provide a greater incentive to recruit the best standards and provides the no scholarships and the R&D and the R&D that your disadvantage talks about. In addition, I want to cross-apply the impact level of the debate. We say that issues of labor exploitation are fundamentally underpinned. The reasons why exploitation happens in the status quo because it creates a world in which coercion is the only way of doing marketing business, and it creates a society based on violence in which the only way we can respond to things is through violence. It means that the impacts of the disadvantage are inevitable. That fundamental mindset shift, which you can't do at the point where you concede or critique the NCAA. Even if some parts of the NCAA are good, you can't win. That is not beneficial at the point where we have a root cause claim that says that the cause of your impact is caused by the systemic impact calculation as well. What is the disadvantage? Okay. The first argument is non-unique. Title IX is the first argument is non-unique. The NCAA isn't protecting anyone within the world of status quo. Your first argument is about Title IX restrictions. Two answers. The first answer is that Title IX doesn't only apply to sports programs. I know this because you can't file a Title IX complaint against the director of your debate program, which is not within the NCAA. The next argument is that Title IX doesn't protect against different things like gender discrimination, which means it's far lying behind the need to be reformed to something that's, for instance, you can advocate for sexual discrimination, but if this is discrimination based on the gender that you identify, not part of your sexual body, you can't advocate for that. Having the NCAA go away will revise debates about this topic, and will be capable of reforming and being able to make it better. You say no pay for play. You say no pay for play happens within the world status quo. Look, I don't think you understand what the affirmative does. We think that there are different types of funding will be able to emerge in order to keep school systems from being intact. There are fundamental problems with school systems that are the result of dividing funding between athletic programs and the scholastic programs. We said that this education system will be able to reform to maintain competitive in the university market to be able to come back. You say no minimum GPA requirement. This is still, even if the NCAA goes away, there will be other different types of organizations that are capable of doing this, which means a race to the top. People want to have the best GPA in order to have the best and have the best publicity for their program. Is way to solve it. You say protecting teams from agents. You list a bunch of names. I'm sorry, I don't know who these people are. My parents took me to dance class, not sports class. But furthermore, I think that you saying protecting them from agents, what I always say is that people should have the ability to decide for themselves the career path that they're going to be able to take in addition to the ways in which you're going to do this. They can get recommendations from the agent, but the agent doesn't have the same control over you that the coach does when you literally can't sell your labor, when you can't sell your labor and the school's capable of taking the entirety of your money. You say academic standards, gender equality, privilege, drop down to the bottom. I want to press by the Title IX argument saying that revealing the flaws that currently exist within the NCAA system, if nothing, require our key more changes. You add to the status quo, you can't solve this.
The order is going to be the plan flaw argument, the topicality argument, I feel like it's stuck below the table.
We need to keep the chairs on the table.
Plan rules of breakup, right?
Huh? Yeah, plan flaw, topicality. This is an important discussion to have. Your plan should have some sort of real-world implication. You should be able to. You should feel out in such a way that aligns with the way that the court system actually works. Our interpretation is that you should have the Indiana District Court rule because that's where the case is right now. All of your arguments assume that we are just researching a bunch of different things and that it's possible to have different interpretations of resolution. Not true. Our research resolved this question the same way as you did. We both came up with the same exact case. We both found that there is one case. It is the Indiana District Court right now, and our argument is that your arguments about having to look around the entire internet to find a bunch of different cases are just ludicrous because there's one case we both found the same one. It's a question of who's ruling on it. Your interpretation is bad for today because it assumes a world in which you get to just change the way the political structure works, which means that we would always have just a meaningless discussion of how the courts work outside of the debate round, which means there's no education in this debate round. We'll win arguments as to why your interpretation necessarily collapses education, and we will win arguments as to why your affirmative never happens. You don't answer our solvency deficit arguments, which means that you will never vote for the affirmative because they solve nothing. The first argument is they mean that certiorari has been granted, that you cannot resolve this argument in the debate round. First argument is that we both found the exact same cases. I'm sorry that Will Chamberlain just doesn't know what it would be. And our argument is that I guess there's no way that you can actually Google this, but our argument is that we have a specific warrant on this claim. It is in the Indiana District Court right now. They just claim that it would be accepted for certiorari. They have not made an argument as to why it would apply for certiorari whatsoever, which means they have no basis for their interpretation. Also, they say do not vote on this because it's a resolutional flaw. First argument, the resolution does not say grant certiorari to anything, which means that it's not a flaw of the resolution. Rather, it says break up the monopoly, which means there's no resolutional basis for this argument that you were trying to make. Additionally, they said that you don't have time to look up everything again. Cross-play the argument that we found the exact same cases, which means that it is not a question of scouring the entirety of the internet. We found the same thing as you. Also, they say the case impacts are more important. No priority question in this argument because there's nothing happens as a consequence of fiat. The only thing that matters is what happens in this debate round. And our argument is the terminal impact of this is education because we are having a discussion of how we can actually change the political system. Your interpretation would happen before us to be miseducated about the world, which means we go outside of this debate round and not understand the court system work, which means that we would be bad political citizens. Additionally, any sort of implications that happen in the debate round, i.e. affecting me and Jason, will always perceive those questions because they are questions of fairness and exclusions of the debate round. You might talk in the abstract about things like exploitation, but our argument is the terminal impact of this exploitation of me and Jason because we are not able to access the debate round in a meaningful fashion. They say that we found the case, which means that it will go to certiorari later. First argument is you have not made a warrant as to why the Indiana District Court would necessarily not rule in a certain way, which would then later have to go up to the Supreme Court. You have not made a warrant as to why it would go to certiorari later whatsoever, and this argument is irrelevant. Even if it goes to certiorari later, that does not interact with your plan. I'll get to you later. I'll get to you at the bottom of this. You say normal means that it will go to the Supreme Court. Wrong. It's going to the Indiana District Court right now, and if that's true, you still have to win a whole bunch of internal link scenarios. This is why we move through a bunch of different courts to get to the Supreme Court, and they've already filled up the docket for this cycle or whatever, which means that's not true. You say that you don't spike out of our ground. It's a question of education, the background, which we would terminalize as making us better policymakers, better citizens of the world, which means that we have a better impact to this argument. Additionally, you say that we get generic links and NEK links, so even generic ground is not good ground. We should be able to have access to arguments that would be specific to your affirmative. Sure, we can make arguments as to why it is that your affirmative is bad or not. But we should also get access to alternate agent counter plans or Supreme Court politics, which would be necessary for a negative ground, especially the one which the affirmative is just obviously true. We would always be jacked in the negative because we don't have access to ground to say that exploitation is good. That would always make us lose. Additionally, you say that we decrease topics of education. Wrong. Our interpretation interrogates the topic better because it causes more depth of education. We would examine the mechanism by which your plan is enacted, which interacts with the way in which we resolve questions of exploitation, because the Supreme Court's rulings or whatever court's rulings would implicate other courts, and that means we have a better depth of education. You say reasonability. First argument is that you will not win any standards, so that's irrelevant, and reasonability is not quantifiable. You should build questions of fairness education. We have specific arguments. That's why your interpretation classes education. You do not have an argument as to why your interpretation is good, a key to that, and you say you have top-specific education about athletes. Our interpretation solves that. You can still talk about that, but you also get to talk about you can talk about how the thing is actually enacted to an extent, or predictability arguments that it's at the district level right now. Also, education that if you need to have real world, and your conceived argument that you have 100% solvency deficit to the affirmative because it can't happen means that you do not vote AF even if they win this position in some other fashion because they've conceded the argument the AF cannot happen, which means that you can't vote AF to extend that you vote negative on fairness and education question.
Okay, so you said that you and Jason are being exploited by the lack of predictability. Is that an inquiry issue?
Yes, this would be evaluated for anything else if your plan can't happen.
Okay, cool.
Topicality. If you don't like the plan flaw argument, and you might feel kind of janky on that, you're definitely going to vote on topicality because their arguments just are not good enough. We asked them questions as to how they actually break down the monopoly of the NCAA. They have not explicated anything. None of their affirmative is based on anything that has to do with breaking down the monopoly. They do not make a single argument in 1AC as to how the breaking down the monopoly would cause some sort of filling in the gap of another organization, or what that other organization would be, or how the structure would look afterwards. Rather, they're just making arguments about the exploitation of the NCAA, which means that they have not explicated anywhere in the spare about how they actually break down the monopoly whatsoever. We have conceded arguments as to why you do not do that, because you only are causing it to not exploit people in with whatever, what do they call it, the banking system of sports, which means that is not an explanation. Jason says in the point of information they still or when he reads this, they still are controlling every other aspect of college sports. There is no breakdown of the NCAA monopoly. You just change the way that they are exercising that monopoly. They are still monopolizing the NCAA, but rather you have not explained why anything else fills in would necessarily supplant it, which means that monopoly still takes place. You say counter interpretation that you don't have you say the NCAA does not have a monopoly on the market. No more for that argument. They do have a monopoly on the market. There's no other organization that you have explicated that has counterbalanced that. And you say that you would not have to get rid of it because oil companies. We do not say you have to get rid of the monopoly. The NCAA. Rather, you have to get rid of their monopoly, which you would have to explicate in some fashion that they no longer dominate it, which you have not explained how they do not dominate the NCAA. Means you don't make our interpretation. Next argument is counter interpretation. The blade breakup means to make smaller. Your interpretation is first of all not competitive with ours. You could break up the monopoly of the NCAA by making it smaller, and it would break the monopoly by allowing for other organizations to fill the gap, which means your interpretation is not often free and fair. Also, that interpretation is very not specific. That allows them to do any sort of quantification. Our interpretation, they can literally just pick one little thing and say that makes it smaller. That is not a good standard. Our interpretation is totalized and says that the monopoly is totally gone, which means that our interpretation is better. Additionally, better limits. You say predictability. Resolution does not say eliminate. First argument is that the resolution says breaks the monopoly. Our argument does not eliminate whatsoever. You have misinterpreted our interpretation. We say break the monopoly, which means that they no longer control the entirety. But you say ground that you only get one plain text, which means you need a new education. There is not a warrant why you do not have one plain text, and still you have the infinite plain text that would still be able to break the monopoly. You say make smaller equal is not monopoly. Our argument, you say it makes smaller and makes it above. You say don't vote on potential abuse. Our argument is that this is also a question of education and resolution of precision. Even if you think it's just potential abuse, that's not a reason why I should have voted here, because it's a question of how they interact with resolution. And our argument is that we should not have to read bad dissides in a super competitive debate round, because that skews the negative ground. You say over limited is worse. So I answer the argument as to why your interpretation is bad. Limits you. Extend across the arguments, no reasonability is bad, and their arguments is we don't talk about real issues. Our arguments that this is a prior question is about whether Jason and I can access the debate, which means that these are more important issues, and you are structurally violent against us if you don't allow us to access the debate.
unplanned thoughts really easy to vote on. Our interpretation is that it's currently in the Indiana District Courts. If you even cross by their own standards about how we should see how the court system works, there's no like normal means where they just give up their territorial rights to the Supreme Court. Obviously, there's hundreds of rulings all the time that district courts vote on all the time. They don't automatically just get something in and just send it to the Supreme Court every single time, which means that they kill any sort of topic-specific education. Also, their interpretation, So you can just vote here. The next part you have to need to vote on is also the part where they drop the fact that this is a 100% solvency deficit, which means that they cannot solve plan. You can vote on presumption here. Charlotte does a good job saying that we need to have what's most predictable, which is the district courts that actually can show how this is broken up. We've asked them plenty of information, we asked them plenty of questions on how this works, why it's the Supreme Court, how it's there, or how it works, and they give us no answers. And also for talk-specific education, they agree that we should have talk-specific education to see how the court systems work to educate all of us, which means that they're at a big disadvantage due to the fact that when they don't show a real-world working of how district courts and the Supreme Court works in conjunction, or why it even go there, you shouldn't look here. On to the topicality. Look, we're flat out winning topicality. We say that you must break up the NCAA. This is the part where this is
The monopoly.
Yeah, you should break up the monopoly, which is bad. The reason it's important is that we should see how it's broken up so we can actually see how they can get to their impacts and their advantages. This is actual abuse because we don't understand how anything changes within the NCAA unless they actually show us that the NCAA breaks up. They say we call it a monopoly. Well, look, we say that doesn't matter. They bring up the gas industry. Well, guess what happened? When they tried to break up that monopoly, guess what happened? Chevron decided to buy Texaco and Shell, so now it owns 3 companies instead of 1. But guess who's in charge? Chevron is still in charge of all 3, which means that you cannot break up or access any of your advantages because they're still in power and still in complete control. The next answer is that their current interpretation is just not competitive. They don't make it smaller. They just pay a fine. When they drop the fact that they just pay a fine and they just they already signed a $1.7 billion television deal just for the year, which means that this is like a drop in the bucket. Which means that they can obviously pay for this, which means that they're not going to break it up. They just pay a fine. It doesn't matter. Paying a fine is not making it smaller. You're just making them pay a little bit of money that they recoup within the next year when they have a good BCS system or March Madness, which is coming up here pretty soon. The next answer is that they say that in ground, they only have 1 playing option. Unfortunately, they have infinite ground options where you have to break up the NCAA. They could have moved it into just conferences so that the Pac-12 has control of the Pac-12 and the SEC has control of the SEC. They could have dissolved the NCAA, which they're talking about anyways, because they're moving right now from Indiana to Kansas City in order to get away from the lawsuit, which means that if they're moving right now and transitioning away to Kansas City and half people aren't going anyways, it's easier to dissolve the NCAA as a whole, which is also something you can do. You could also run you could also say they break up the monopoly by allowing for multiple conferences, or to allow for individual TV deals, or even allow for individual licensing deals with each school so they can all make their own money to be able to recruit how they want to, or just get rid of that players can make their own wages and you can't have any stipulations on coaches' salaries. There's an infinite number of plan texts they could have ran that would have made them topical. They just didn't. You should punish them for that and vote them down. The next answer is that they say that you shouldn't vote on potential abuse. So unfortunately, there's massive amounts of articulated abuse due to the fact that, one, they can't answer our question unless it's broken down. They just say it's like an antitrust thing, and then they also say, that it will be because there's money, but now something makes it smaller. These are all abusive because they delink our disadvantages, so all our advantages are predicated upon the NCAA not having we don't have coherent strategy because we don't know how the NCAA loses what forms of power to see, one, how they get their own impacts, or two, how we can link our disadvantages because we don't know if it does actually break down things like GPA requirements or Title IX problems, or things like where the money goes to all the schools from revenue sharing. We don't understand how this works under their plan if they don't actually break up the NCAA, which means, one, it's 100% solvency takeout as well, which means you go up on presumption. But second, I think you're voting on topicality for topics such as education because they kill, one, all fairness to them around, but two, they kill our ability to have any sort of education. They want to talk about the real issues. They should probably have real links to their advantages so we can have real links to our disadvantages so we can actually see how the topic flushes out to talk about structural violence.
Cool. The order is the 1AC, topicality, and then land. Despite a full block on topicality and procedural, you concede several important arguments that mean you evaluate the 1AC in a prior question. You evaluating either of these procedurals. First, the advantage. The role, you concede an argument that says the role of elders, the methodology comes first because it underpins and enforces practice. We need to be able to change our mindset about women before we can think about making use of an example about how we change our mindset about how women are capable of thinking before we're capable of giving them the ability to vote or act within government. This means that change happens through our speech act. This is because the 1AC goes entirely conceded you. Evaluated in a prior question of the risk that we saw for what he's seen, and that is capable of outweighing the 0% offense that they extended out of the block.
Can you read up in the and show how this is an example of why method should come first?
Okay. This is why case comes before topicality. First, your T-shells are based around the facts that you were excluded from this debate. Title IX excludes genderqueer people and allows discrimination against them. This causes genderqueer debaters to leave the activity. This is a real-world example about how people are actively excluded because of their inability to express themselves within within this activity. Secondly, discussing Title IX and its flaws has real-world implications. You articulate this on your TSAT. We will say they cross-apply that from the framework flow that allows the discussion of underlying issues leading to social change. This can only happen by discussing the actual topic instead of just discussing theoretical issues within the activity. Third of all, preventing us from discussing Title IX excludes more people from debate than you. More people from debate than just you two. Our entire team thought about quitting the team when we were incapable of functioning within the framework that our director of forensics established for us. This is why we were capable, or this is why we filed the Title IX complaint. The lack of predictability or ground in this individual debate round change depending on the debate round, but it doesn't change to be able to discuss durable topics like things like Title IX, things that actually have real world implications. Change happens at the individual level before it happens at the state level. This means that we are the only ones that control any internal link to real world education, which is why you prefer us even on a theoretical level. T. The net benefits to our interpretation outweigh the zero dishas to our interpretation that are quantified throughout the block. We have quantified not only theoretically but also in terms of education why it's reasonably preferable to choose our interpretation. This not only answers a question of priority in terms of which should be evaluated first, topicality through your exclusion or our exclusion through or people's exclusion through the real world issues that we discussed. First is set to your interpretation. You say that the affirmative is not based within the affirmative doesn't just break down the NCAA since when it required for an affirmative to put in a new system. If your interpretation was not this in the beginning, you did not say that we had to see who would fill in the gap. I think that this is not only an unreasonable burden, but this extrapolation in the MO probably means that I get to say why it's bad, why we should have to explain exactly who would fill in the gaps. That not only explodes, that not only exponentially decreases the amount of flexibility that the affirmative gets in the MG, but also infinitely explodes the amount of predictability that you get, which means that which would be in an unfair capacity, which means that negative would win every debate if we had to specify every single thing that would happen as a result of the plan. And that's why you get creativity with the way in the term of dishats, but also they say literally exactly in the MO direct quote entirely without the NCAA. If the res was supposed to say eliminate, then it would have said eliminate. This is net benefit to our interpretation. The breakup means to make smaller. We have a predictability net benefit, which means that the res would say eliminate if it meant eliminate, but it says breakup instead. You do not suggest a top of the plan for the interpretation that you provide. Also, we have an over-limiting net benefit that goes conceded. We say that this is necessary for affirmative predictability to be able to have a little bit of flexibility. You do not. You say that there are infinite amount of plain text that we can read, but you do not give a suggestion for a topical plain text. We say that it is much worse to skew affirmative prep because we have 7 minutes of offense that we can generate, while you have 27 that you can generate against RF, and you also get a starting point which you can make offense. This not only skews the PMC, but it also makes it impossible for us to compete through later speeches, which also collapses to be an internal link, which is your internal link to education. Also, we have a ground net benefit that goes conceded. We say that if there was one plan that was eliminated, we say that we need to be if one plan was only to eliminate, then we would not have access to different types of education and research, which is the internal link to real world education. The U.S. is so important. I think that we are controlling the internal link to education not only through our Title IX argument, but also through the arguments that we're making about education within this debate around plan flaw. There are several reasons not to vote on the sheet. First of all, it is entirely non-verifiable. That's pretty easy. Second argument is that you say in the MO that you should be able to have access to things like SCOTUS, politics, and alternative active counterplans as per the MG number 6. And 7, we say that you get the very arguments that you cite as wanting, which means that all the arguments that you get without the affirmative, like with the district court, are bad because you would not have access to these SCOTUS stats, which are much more predictive, which means that it would be even less fair for you. The thing that you are asking for is so much less fair for you. I don't know how you're trying to access an internal link to fairness. Also, if you wanted to have a real world discussion, you do not make a single argument about this Supreme Court case. There is no ground loss without a single argument about this case.
No, neither do I, actually. I was like Jason knows. Yes.
Oh, well, that sounds nice of Katie.